I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Charlene. Welcome to Empowered, Life Lessons of Everyday Women.
Each episode, you are going to meet an amazing woman who has struggled through challenges both in her home life and work life and has become very successful. Meet Sweta V. Know when to share your opinion. Sweta V wears many hats. Adjunct Marketing Professor, PhD in Ayurveda, and author of over 14 books. She helps people find a balance, a holistic approach to health and happiness. So grab a cup of coffee, get in a comfy chair as we talk to Sweta. Welcome, Sweta. It's nice to have you join us today.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here, Charlene and Rebecca. Always nice to get into a conversation with other women.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Sweta, if you were able to go back and talk to your 20-year-old self and give her a little piece of advice, what might that be?
Absolutely have your opinions, but know when to share them.
Oh, we haven't had that one yet. I like that. Can you go into it a little bit more? Why don't you think that people should share?
So my personality is very much around needs to be honest, authentic, transparent. That's not how the world always works. As you get more mature, you understand where your stance is different from how the rest of the world works. But at 20, you are different and you want people to understand your stance. You waste a lot of energy. People have already made up their minds. So know where to share your opinion. If you're applying for a job, you in academics, with your family, with your partner, your close friends, fine. I feel like with social media, people feel this pressure or the need to constantly say something about everything that's going on. And I'm sure I did that in my 20s as well. And it's exhausting because you can't have and you don't need to have an opinion about everything. And even if you do, it doesn't need to be public.
That's very wise advice. I really like that because I think, especially with social media, right? People want to be engaged with everything. And, you need to know when to share, when to share your opinions and when not to. Right. And sometimes sharing your opinions means you're not necessarily listening to other people too. Okay, so you started working in marketing. How did you get into marketing and how long were you in marketing?
If that helps, I still am. I teach marketing and communications at a business school. In fact, I'm headed to Mumbai tomorrow to speak, to give the keynote at World Marketing Congress. Yeah, so I bring wellness and communications in the same space. First master's was in sports nutrition, and I got a job with Kellogg's in Mumbai. And, my training was with athletes. I was designing meal plans for them. And for me, that question was, how is it, and I'll give the American equivalent in terms of geography, how is someone from Texas being asked to eat the same thing as an athlete from Montana? Like where they grew up, the geography, the soil, the temperature, everything varies. And I started to find those answers in Ayurveda. So I've always been so I worked in marketing communications for Kellogg's, and I continued to work in marketing communications eventually now even for my own company and brand. But I also teach. So it's always been a part of me. But it's very rooted in wellness because I feel in the world of marketing and communications, it lacks mindfulness. People oftentimes come from a reactive space. So how do you ground yourself before you can even tell a story about another brand if you can't even tell your own story?
That's interesting. So you came into Ayurveda. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
You came into that based on the work that you were doing in Mumbai. So can you explain a little bit more about that? Because I'm not familiar with that.
Absolutely. So Ayurveda, I'll break it up into two words. Ayu means life, Veda means science. So it's a science of life. It's the oldest medical system that stems from India. It's an ancient healing system of being in one with nature and your health. And it reminds you that absence of disease doesn't mean presence of good health. So your diet and lifestyle can make such immense changes in your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. So it's very customized. We all have an Ayurvedic DNA blueprint, and based off of that, an Ayurvedic doctor will help you heal in your journey. And so Ayurveda in the United States is practiced differently. I had to do a lot of internships in Indian hospitals, and The hospitals, like, and my area of specialty is mental well-being, emotional health, gut health. So I would sit with an Ayurvedic doctor in the field of psychiatry and imagine you using diet, lifestyle, and herbs to make someone feel better about themselves. So I have a lot of respect for therapy and Western medicine, but not everybody needs that. That shouldn't be the go-to for everybody. For some people, talk therapy could help. For some, it's just, can you start going to bed on time? That will lower anxiety. Can we just regulate your nervous system? So it's like starting with those small things, and that is accessible and affordable and available to each one of us. We just don't know much about it.
So I go back to that old saying of you are what you eat. And truly, that's the philosophy that I personally, what you put in your mouth every day and eat affects everything that you do. And so it sounds like that's a simplistic way of putting it, but it definitely affects how you feel, what your energy level is like. Are you in a good mood? And those are kinds of things. And I think that's something I can really relate to because it's how I practice my life.
Well, and I think it also goes back to, when people talk about comfort food, right? They're eating certain things because it makes them feel better. Doesn't mean that it's what they should be eating for themselves. It just, from a mental perspective, that's what helps them as well. And I guess what you're saying is you need to look at the overall thing, and maybe the talk therapy or something will help them feel better about themselves so they won't have to eat things that are not necessarily good for them.
It's also a combination, right? So to your point, in Ayurveda, we look at diseases as 6 stages. So when you're just going out of balance, like if this is your DNA, your blueprint, and you're a little bit out of balance, you might just say, hey, I have a scratchy throat. Maybe I need like warm soup or ginger tea. But if it's a full-blown cold, I've seen people eat ice cream. Like, yeah, no, I feel like I crave that. So I think this is where the conversation comes in. How out of balance is one person? And we know about the gut biome connection that Western medicine has been talking about. Ayurveda came up with this concept 5,000 years ago. That, there 80% of the serotonin is released in your gut. So that's why we say your second brain is in your gut. So to your point, it's what you feed yourself will impact. If you just eat sugary things, in an ideal world, that's what Thanksgiving should be about, all pies, right? For 2 days, then you don't feel really great in terms of energy, mood. Some people might even start to experience depressive symptoms. So from an Ayurvedic standpoint, it depends on what is out of balance. And that's the imbalance we work on.
It's very interesting, yeah.
So it's a very holistic approach.
And customized.
So we like to, you're focusing on really the whole person and helping others in a wide variety of areas. How did you get involved with helping others, particularly in the mental health area?
I feel the world that we live in, no matter which culture, religion, ethnicity we come from, there is still shame and taboo attached to mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's a very family and geographic location conversation. If you are in spaces where people are okay talking about it, it's fine. But then if you live in a place where there are only 100 people and no one wants anyone else to know what they're going through, they will not talk about it. So I realized whether I was teaching yoga or communications, the mental health aspect always showed up. Right? And like how someone responded or reacted to a situation. And I feel like there were not enough conversations because when we think mental health, we automatically, there's this, there is taboo, or you think it's something so clinical that a person needs to be on medication. But you know what? I think the pandemic reminded us we all have generalized anxiety. Anxiety doesn't mean like everyone has a panic attack, but we all started fearing for our safety and safety of our loved ones. What is that? That's anxiety, right? So I think that mental health, I feel like it's such a big umbrella. Stress is under that. Burnout falls under that. So I work with high achievers as well, and people in the C-suite and entrepreneurs and also college kids. So all of them are high achievers in their own space. And no one is talking about mental health because to them, mental health is either anxiety or depression. And I'm like, no, when you don't know how to pause, you're constantly trying to prove your worthiness in the number of hours. That's a mental health issue, not sleeping enough. If in Ayurveda, insomnia is a mental health issue. So just again, looking at mental health as not so prescriptive and labeled, but just as a holistic approach to life and even productivity.
Well, you're putting, I want to say, a better face on it, because most people think when there's a problem with your mental health that there's something seriously wrong with you, rather than it being, not everybody is going to be schizophrenic. Not everybody is going to be bipolar. There's so many different aspects of it. Just being depressed because something happens, a death of a loved one, what have you, it can run the gamut, I guess.
Which kind of brings us to grief, which I know you're very involved with grief. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I wanted to share this book. It's called The Loss That Binds Us, and it has 108 tips to navigate grief. And because 108 is a spiritual number, and in Hinduism, in the yoga world, in Christianity. So I looked up in Buddhism, like all the old world religions as well. So that's why I came up with 108 tips. And why I got into grief work is no one chooses to, I believe. I lost my dad, who was my anchor, and my father-in-law 2 days apart,
Oh,
unexpected.
wow.
And so 2 different cities, 2 different countries, 2 different continents, trying to figure that all out. And I'm a type A. In Ayurveda, speak a pitta person, which means a doer, a person who will show up, get stuff done. But I was also burning out on the inside from the grief because I was just taking care of others. And when I turned to find material on grief, it was either about someone who'd gotten to the other side. And I found that very judgmental because no one gets to the other side. You learned to live with the grief. When you lose a loved one or you lose a relationship or something with health, also redefining grief. Because for very often people would think grief just means loss of a loved one. No, if your friendship of 30 years ends, that's grief.
That's
You
right.
know, having to relocate to a different place when your heart is not in it, but circumstances sort of demand you to do that, that's grief. A marriage ends, that grief. I have a client who couldn't step out literally because of their invisible illness for almost a year. And people would look at them, oh, you look great. So you're dismissing someone. That's grief. Like seasons have gone by. This person is at home, but just because physically they look okay and you can't see the illness, you've just assumed they're doing great. So I also wanted to highlight that there are different kinds of grief. And then there's hierarchy and comparison. Instead of unifying people, it again gets down to whose grief matters more. So I think I just wanted to educate people, learn along the way, raise awareness, and bring compassion in.
Yeah.
Because I felt that pressure as well, where people thought, oh, I should move on. The time that I lost my safe space in the world, what does moving on means? It just means I have a different identity now.
Well, I think you kind of touched on something, because even though someone looks good, doesn't mean that a lot of people put on a face, right? And they want to project something to the rest of the world. You have no idea what that person is going through on the inside. And unless you ask them the questions and you give them grace, you won't know. And I think that's really important.
So you talked about, and you wear a lot of hats. As like you said, you're a type A personality. You're also an author. The book that you just shared with us is not your first book. What made you decide to become an author? And do you self-publish, or are you published? And can you talk a little bit about that industry? Because I think our listeners might be interested in hearing more about that.
Absolutely. So for me, writing is as natural as breathing. My dad was a poet by night. He was an engineer by day, a social activist in the middle of the afternoon. I come from a line of type A's, and he was a poet. So I grew up around words. And he would, while others were giving other kinds of gifts to children, family, friends, and relatives, my dad was the one always buying books. He said, once someone knows how to read and write, they have an advantage over the mental health, because you'll never be alone. You'll never feel, oh, I'm isolated, because you know how to read and then you enjoy writing. So I think I grew up around poetry. His sister, my aunt, whom I never met, she died pretty early in life, was also a poet. But I realized I really enjoyed writing. So even when I was a little kid, I would tell my mom, it was a joke in the family, I would practice my signature. She's like, what is that? I would tell her it's an autograph. I don't know where it'll go, but I'll sign a book someday. And for me, writing is how I make sense of the world. It completely is. Like, I need to write things down to navigate anything. And to answer your question, yeah, I've been published by a press. It's not self-published. Yeah, and
Was that difficult to get into that market? Because that's what I've heard is very difficult to have somebody publish you.
Right.
Self-publishing is, and even with self-publishing, it's kind of like having a podcast that nobody's ever heard of. It's there, but you don't know it's there. So how did you get into the sort of the publishing world? And that would be interesting, I think.
it starts with the word be patience. Pitching and patience and pitching and patience. And I'll also say I have worked with a traditional agent. And just because, and I want to remind this to our listeners, just because you've had one arrangement doesn't mean that's how it'll always be. You know, even with agencies, agents move, you change, your life situations change. I'm writing about different things now than I did 15 years ago, right? So the same agent wouldn't be interested in my work. I'd have to find somebody else. So then there have been times where I've been signed by an agent and they had a change of heart in terms of a career change and they moved across the country. So that's also happened. So I started pitching to small presses, medium-sized presses, and that's how I found my publisher. So it really will test your patience if someone wants to go through this route. But it's like anything else. It's like building a business. It's like that yoga practice on the mat. Every day your body will be different. So be okay with it.
So you founded Numi Life. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, Nimi Life.
Numi Life. So can you tell us a little bit about that company and what made you found it?
Absolutely. So it's a holistic wellness company, all Ayurveda based. It's minority and women owned, certified. And I found this company after we lost my mom. She was young. It was very sudden. She was on her way to vacation with my dad. Then we get a call. She's unwell. By the time I even landed, she was gone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was. And there were answers in medical science like, oh, this happened. But I'm an Ayurvedic doctor. Why did that happen? It's getting to the root cause. And I couldn't find that root cause in the conversations from really exemplary doctors. And I think thus began my journey. I didn't want anybody else to have to go through that. And Ayurveda is a lot about prevention and maintenance. So if you can take care of yourself, you can actually prevent certain illnesses, right? If we eat a certain way, live a certain way, breathe a certain way, move a certain way, pay attention to our environment. And I think that's so Nimi was my mom's name. And she was known for her healing ability. She was the type, if someone had a heart attack, she knew exactly what kind of spices to put and what kind of food to cook for them. And the doctors would be amazed at, how do you know this? She was intuitive. You know, she didn't study medicine or any of that. So I wanted to honor her, and she gave life to so many people. So hence the name Nimi Life.
I like that. That's great. So you do wear a lot of hats, as we've mentioned. Do you find yourself, how do I want to word this? You're giving so much to other people. Do you spread yourself so thin that you don't have time for yourself?
I used to have that problem. And it goes back to the first question about what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Okay.
Not everything is your problem. Not everything is your responsibility. As women, we struggle with that a lot. And as healers, especially, you think you see every sick person and it's your job. No, it's not. If someone is not ready for help, you can't offer them help. Then that's your ego trying to fix someone. So I think all this learning has also helped me, and I'm very good at pausing. I start to see the signs of burnout. I'll start to see what stress is. If I'm feeling edgy, that is stress. That's not my nature. I have a pretty happy-go-lucky personality. So if I'm not being myself and I've been eating right, moving right, spending time, very quality conscious of who I spend time with. I will not say yes to everything. So I'm like, if I'm doing all of that, because environmental toxins, which is emotional toxins, also can make us sick, right? So I'm like, okay, if I'm doing everything right, and I still feel like I'm stretched too thin or I'm always tired, something needs to change. So I think the pauses on a daily basis are very, very important. Spending time, solo time is very important. Even if it's 30 minutes, it's uncomfortable. It might just bring up some dark thoughts, like if you're sitting by yourself on some days. But it's okay to know where you stand. How are you doing with yourself, by yourself?
I think that's something that Western society has been pretty poor at doing. I think, there is more awareness now than there was certainly like 30, 40 years ago when I was trying to raise my kids. But I think that we do a really poor job of like understanding and recognizing, like I said, time with yourself, kind of introspecting about who we are, what makes us happy, or, if something's frustrating us. I also think that there's a whole society of women, and maybe kind of more in my age range, but that we're all fixers. We were grown up to be fixing. And so we feel like you said, I know so many people that have taken on that matriarch portion of their family where they're taking care of everybody but themselves.
Yeah. I remember when my kids were young, and I don't remember where I read this, but it was kind of like a bank account, right? You're always putting money out to other people and you never put the money back into your own self. And I always would try to reflect on that, because if I kept dishing things out, comfort, everything else, and I didn't give the time to myself where I could regenerate, I was worthless. I became not worthless, but I became drained, and that wasn't healthy for me.
I agree, but you know what? I'll also say that this is such a global disaster, is the big word that I'd use. People are so disconnected from themselves, and constantly being in crowds is labeled as cool. Being by yourself, oh, they are an introvert. See, like the nose goes up. There are all of these labels that we live with, and I'm an extrovert. So I have to be super careful about who I allow in, because how else do I recharge? People are recharging around me. I need to come back, disconnect, and recharge. And until my dad, I was very close to my father. So until my dad was alive, that was my recharge station. So now I've become even more particular about, and you said it, like this role of a matriarch. Okay, my parents are gone. Now I represent them. And then one day I had to sit down. No. You are taking on these roles that no one asked you to. And then you get upset when others don't live up to those expectations. And no one owes you a damn thing the way you don't owe anyone. Just be a good human being.
Yeah, and I know we're talking about life lessons, so I'm going to share one of mine. One of my life lessons that I really think you kind of hit on it was one of the things I've learned is to not have expectations. Now that sounds really silly, but when I have expectations, I go through disappointment, I go through happiness. There's all these emotions. If I disconnect from what the outcome is going to be in my life, or what I expect somebody to do, or how somebody reacts to me, it's so much easier. And I find that my life is so much better. So, getting rid of expectations. Now, it's okay to have expectations, but expectations brings other things like disappointment. And so for me, I just wanted to share that because we are all about life lessons and little golden nuggets. And so that's something I've learned, and I'd love to pass that along to our listeners.
Thank you. That's a good reminder.
It is a good reminder. It really is.
So you talked about your biggest influence, and I assume just from your conversation, it was both your mom and your dad, but can you speak to who you think has been the biggest influence on your life?
I think my father. He was very unusual for his generation, just for a man from any generation, any country. He was a feminist, and he was an artist, but also an engineer. He was like this good combination. And I never heard, a lot of Indian kids, my generation, had that pressure of become a doctor, become an engineer. And he was like, no, get decent grades so you can get into college. But it's more important to me that you're a good human being. Donate so much of your salary, no matter what you make, to those less fortunate. You have a voice. Use that voice to help others who don't. So I think he's been a very big influence in my life. And he saw me for who I am, not a version that would have looked pretty.
And he didn't yes, I think that's really nice because, there's a lot of people that put expectations on their children, what they want to become, because they feel like that's a reflection of them. If they become a lawyer, if they become a doctor, that's a good reflection on me. But having your children happy and able to take care of themselves and well-educated, those are huge wins. And I think I'm proud of all three of my children, and they're very different than I am. They've gone into things that are nothing similar to me. And that's great because they're their own individual.
And I think you said it a little bit, Rook. You said, I'm just happy to put kind human beings on this earth. That was my life goal for my kids. Yeah. I had no expectations about what they were going to do or how they were going to do it. Yeah, I always told my parents, you never gave me a choice. I had to go to college, and that was their thing, not my thing. And maybe I wouldn't have gone to college, but I'm kind of glad they pushed me to get that degree because it opened doors. Same thing for my children. But what I'm proudest of, and the things that I'm most proud about my children, is they both are good human beings. Mm-hmm. I think that's so important.
It is important.
We always ask this question, but what do you think is your biggest life lesson? And do you have any other advice you'd like to give to our listeners?
This might sound a little heavy, but it's very true. And I've realized this. My dad has been gone 2.5 years, and it's slowly, once the grief is heavy and then it starts to become lighter. And then you come to a place of acceptance that sadness and joy coexist. And that's life. Doesn't mean anything else. It's just that you've lost a big part of your life. Your identity is transformed. So you're learning to navigate all of that. But in doing so, I've realized the impermanence is real. You thought the friends who would be with you until you were in your grave doesn't mean they always will be. And so things like that, because I went to a boarding school, growing up in a culture where, you were always surrounded by friends and family. People don't do very good with grief. They don't know how to handle someone's grief. So I think that's where it reminded me of impermanence. People love a version of people. I've always been that energizer bunny, that happy person. So when I was navigating grief, people didn't know, some people, not everyone. I have some incredible people as well, including my husband. But it's just that they didn't know how to handle Sweta, who was a little lost, because I was always the navigator in their life.
Well, but I think people are afraid. They don't know how to approach someone that they know is grieving, because when they don't want to maybe say the wrong thing or make them upset. But sometimes, what I find, I just give people hugs. If I know they're, frustrated, well, I ask them first, because not everybody's a hugger. I understand that. But for me, I may not know what to say, but I know that the feel of touch can heal somebody so much that that's what I'm willing to do.
And it's sometimes just as much as just going putting your hand on somebody's shoulder
touch
to kind of get that connection, because I am not a hugger.
I know.
And I'm uncomfortable with that. That's just not who I am. But I'm also not afraid to say what I wanted to say to somebody, even if it's uncomfortable. So, I have some situations right now where, somebody's not well, and you don't really know, it's their grief. They're going through their loss right now, and you don't know how to, but I usually just will come around and say something. I'll preface it with hey, I know this may be uncomfortable, but I want to reach out to you.
Well, just someone, right? A lot of times it's like, okay, avoidance. Well, I think that's the worst thing you can do for somebody who's going through a hard time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I meant by impermanence, because the people you assume will always be there, they might not. Once you make space, the new folks who move in. And it just reminds me of the transient nature of life, which I never had to think about. And it's not just about mortality, just the spirit and energetics of relationships.
I think that's
very
great.
Nice.
I think we're going to leave on that note. That was
wonderful. What a great conversation.
We really enjoyed the Sweta. This has been it's definitely eye-opening, and I hope our listeners can get some good tidbits out of this on just life-work balance and life balance, because we've done a lot of work conversations, but this one I think really deals with some other issues that we haven't tapped on before. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful talking with you.
Likewise, my pleasure.
To our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Empowered Life Lessons of Everyday Women. We would really appreciate if you could leave us a rating or a review. If you have any challenges or questions you are facing, we want to hear from you, as we value your input and suggestions. And if you have a compelling story or life lesson you would like to share, please connect with us at empoweredlifelessons@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, other social media platforms, or visit us at empoweredlifelessons.com. In our next episode, meet Christina I. Christina has a breadth of experience in retail in a variety of roles. She is currently the head of business development. Christina guides us to understand how your strengths will help you to be successful. She also currently serves on an advisory board to support women navigating in a variety of areas.